Well, Tim, thank you for joining us. I hate doing other people's introductions because I like to hear what they say about themselves instead of some pre recorded script. So, if you'd introduce yourself and share a little more, and you've got the floor for the next 10 minutes.
Okay, well, hi everybody. It's great to meet all of you. This is a huge honor for me. Thank you, David. My name is Tim Soerens. I live in Chicago, on the north side of Chicago in Lincoln Square neighborhood. And I am, maybe the best way to talk about myself is I'm a kind of a card-carrying neighborhoodian and entrepreneur. So I'm involved in a whole bunch of different projects that are trying to pursue the healing of everything possible, primarily through the lens of the neighborhood. So that includes working with faith communities and especially churches. It means local economies, reorganizing some of our civic life around neighborhoods and cities. Um, that's a pretty good frame for me. My primary work is actually, David and I haven't talked a ton about this, is probably working with faith communities that are trying to organize their collective kind of congregational life around the common good at the neighborhood level. And then I've also co-founded a venture called Neighborhood Economics that some of you may have heard of. And I'm going to talk much more about that today. Um, and then we'll have a conversation. We'll see where things go. As a maybe orientation to neighborhood economics and some of what we're trying to hope to do there, I would maybe tell a little bit of a story of a room that I was not in. It would have been fun to be in this room. But some of you, I'm sure, are aware of, or maybe have worked in, or maybe even kind of have expertise in the broader field of impact investing. Has anybody been in that world at all? Well, years ago now, well over 10 years ago now, I was asked to be the curator of an event series that's called SoCap or Social Capital Markets. It's a big impact investing conference that's in San Francisco every fall. Actually, it's moving to Chicago this year, but um, the tagline of that event is called SoCap or Social Capital Markets, and it's the conference at the intersection of money and meaning. So a pretty good set of parameters for this conversation. And it was and is trying to address, you could say, the myth of two-pocket thinking. And that's the story that I maybe tell briefly that might frame how neighborhood economics got going, what we're up to now, and why I think it's pretty hopeful. So, Kevin Jones, who also some of you may have known, or maybe I don't know if he's ever spoken at this before, but he's one of the co-founders of, Neighborhood Economics as well as SoCap. He tells the story of as a, as an investor, he was a part of a fair trade coffee company that had been given the incredible opportunity to try and raise some capital with Mr. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft. And apparently, as the story at least was told to me, they begin the pitch and it's going really well. And this is relatively early on in the days of social enterprise. And they make their pitch and they talk about this company that both generates profit, but ultimately its aims is to do good. In this case, I think to like grow the sustainable ecology of for farmers, coffee farmers. And purportedly, I don't want to get sued for this. We are recording, but purportedly, what happened um, is before the pitch ended, Mr. Gates says to the person pitching, which was not Kevin. He wasn't actually in the room at the time either. He was just involved. He said, "I stop. Yeah, I'm done. Like I've heard enough." And they said, "Well, oh, okay. Why?" And he's like, "Well, let me just explain something to you. Um, I'm wearing a pair of pants, and in those pair of pants, there are two pockets. In this one pocket, I have a whole bunch of money that I have made from my role as founder and chair of Microsoft, and it goes in this pocket. And then I take with this hand some of the money out of that pocket and I put it into this pocket. That pocket is the foundation. The foundation does good. What you're asking me to do is to mess up my pockets. I'm not interested. I don't want to be involved. Thank you very much for coming." Goodbye. And in many ways, that sets the stage for, you could say, a conversation around, is that true or not? Is there more of like a myth around two-pocket thinking, or basically, is it all one? And the ways that we categorize things are maybe not as helpful as we could lean into. So I would argue that the latter is true, that it is a myth of two-pocket thinking. There's dollars, there's capital, there's energy, and there's one planet and one human race and one thing to care for. And we're going to get a whole lot better if we have a larger spectrum of imagination for how to get after things. So that still, underneath it, is has the, I guess you could say, the precondition that so much of the change that we belong to see does have obviously deep economic roots, and we want the widest spectrum possible to get after that change. Um, I'll pause right there and then just say the second kind of part of the story for neighbor economics, it's really origin story, is that we got to know, I don't know, David, if you've ever gotten to know a gentleman named Peter Block. Some of you maybe have read him. He's
Yeah,
written,
that's actually how I came to learn about you. You and Kevin were on a podcast where Peter Block was the main guest, and he brought you in. This was like, what, 10, 12 years ago? I can't remember the name
yes.
of the guy's podcast, but it was a good podcast. Yeah.
Well, he is a legend in my books, and one of the phrases that he created that has been a huge guiding force in my life, and perhaps for many of us, is that leadership is convening. And I think that he would say um, it's not just an aspect of leadership, like fundamentally, leadership is convening. And whether you go with him on that or not, it gave me a whole lot more impetus to see the role of convening, bringing people together, not unlike what you're doing right now, along shared interest, shared desire, shared capacity to make something new happen that otherwise couldn't have happened had there not been a kind of convening. So that was a big part of the reason for I'm sorry, for neighbor economics um, to be mobilized as a new venture. So what we're trying to do is convene the people that are already repairing local economies. We're not trying to convince people that we need to repair local economies, although I think that we do. Um, I'll just say a little bit about these three words, and then we can have a broader conversation, maybe even of all of them. The word convene matters so much, but because what we're trying to do is identify the local heroes in cities and states all over the country who are already doing this work. It could be from various sectors, it could be at various levels, but they don't necessarily need to be convinced that economic repair is necessary. They're already doing things. And oftentimes, they feel relatively alone in that work. They might feel uncelebrated. They might not have the capacity or the access to capital that they would long for, but they believe that repairing local economies is some of the most important work that we could be doing right now. The word local, I think, is really, really crucial in that, as I said earlier, I really do believe that we're living in a moment where the neighborhood is probably the best unit of change for us. We live in a, I would say, overall a culture where this is a bit of a brushstroke, but I think it's fair for just conversation that on the quote, kind of like right side of things politically, orientation primarily revolves around the individual, around responsibility, pulling up your bootstraps. And there's a absolutely, of course, there's a huge important place for that. And then I would say, but it's focused primarily, I'd say, on the individual and tends to divorce itself somewhat of like broader systems and structures and context. And then over on, I would say, the left or left of center, there is really, really crucial and critical emphasis on systems and structures. Of course, those are absolutely formative for all of us, but might leave the individual somewhat isolated. And my take is that neighborhoods and the local is a kind of third way that invites both the agency of individuals and the kind of collective co-creating of systems and institutions that is also required. So I really do believe that um, pursuing change kind of from neighborhood to neighborhood, because it is a system that includes much of our lives. Um, oh, good question, Grace. I define a neighborhood um, as a geographic area that's large. I also like the word parish, which is a whole different conversation. But I would define a neighborhood usually as a geographic area that you can take responsibility for, where you can live, most of your life. So not purely residential, but it's small enough that you can be known and have some impact. So in most cities, the the city tends to have neighborhoods, but in more suburban areas, um, that whole suburb, for my working, that's why I like the word parish better in some ways. It might be better thought of as like place-based and or kind of taking responsibility for the entire suburb. In more rural communities, I think um, that's where the word neighborhood really breaks down because there kind of aren't any necessarily if its population's really spread out. But again, the idea is taking responsibility for a geographic area that's large enough to live a good bit of your life, and then to see the interconnection, of course, between neighborhoods. The great urbanist Jane Jacobs said that great cities are federations of great neighborhoods, and I believe that's absolutely true. Finally, on this last thing of local, and maybe this is will ruffle feathers, I feel like most folks that are pursuing change understandably pick an issue, like a niche issue, um, that is obviously really important, whether that's um, affordable housing, homelessness,
Mm.
addiction, etc. We need domain expertise on that, of course. But what I experience, particularly in the more like helping sectors, is that those then issues become a kind of, without, I don't think meaning to, they often like compete for attention and dollars and getting into budgets. So the holism is not, it's just not there. There's all of these various categories that are fighting for survival, as opposed to looking for how do all of these things interrelate on the behalf of the common good. So I think that is a profound opportunity. So that's local. And then economies kind of speaks for itself, but I think that generally in the world that we live in now, to cultivate change without economic transformation makes it extremely difficult in the end. So convening is like not necessarily convincing, convening um, the people that are repairing. That's another keyword repair. Like it does name historic injustice, it names inequity, it names power imbalance, it names access to capital, it names harm, but its orientation is towards repair. How do we name what's been going on, and how do we also reimagine, reorganize, and rebuild? Again, on behalf of the common good from neighborhood to neighborhood. So that's I mean I'm probably at my 10 minutes now. I can pause here. There's a handful of
Well,
conversations here in the but Dave, why don't you take it away from
yeah,
there?
well, I'm going to start with one question and then everybody can raise their either physical or virtual hands. We like for people to come on screen and ask the question themselves. We do ask that it's actually a question, not promoting something else. And if you could try and keep it to one question that's relatively succinct, that'd be great so that we can get as many people to interact with each other and with Tim as possible. But I'll just start with my question, Tim, which is one thing you haven't mentioned much about is the annual conference.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and I'm wondering if you could describe that a little bit and who's an ideal attendee and what do people talk about there. I think that would be useful.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. Well, it's actually coming up. Sometimes we do one, sometimes even more than one. We're doing a gathering in Galveston, Texas. Neighborhood Economics is September 15th and 16th, and you're all very welcome. Galveston, as you might know, is an island um, just 45 minutes from Houston, Texas. And lots of incredible things are happening there. Usually at most gatherings, there are like categories that we're focusing on as people are seeking to broadly convene local economies. So that has to do with entrepreneurship in Galveston, broadly catalytic capital. So that's both impact investing and like creative philanthropy. Has to do, we'll be having conversations, of course, about climate resilience in Galveston, which is one of the most vulnerable cities as it relates to climate change. We're having some incredible conversations about the creative economy, so art and artists and tourism and small businesses that are creating vibrancy. And then we'll also have conversations about how faith groups, we think of the event as kind of faith friendly, but not faith based. So by no means do you need to be um, come from any particular religious tradition, but we see faith communities as contributing to the broader economy as well, not least from um, their structures and buildings and social capital. So
If
yeah,
there's a question, just, some people are concerned about traveling to Texas for a whole variety of reasons, but especially with trans. Do you know much about how the Galveston community is in that
that's a
regard?
good question. I haven't been, I'm going to go in a couple of weeks, so I wouldn't be able to like authoritatively answer that question
Okay.
um, very well. I can definitely say that like my experience of all the partners that we've been working with so far are have been fantastic, and there's nothing that's given me cause, but
Yeah.
I couldn't definitively say.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
Grace.
Hi, thanks so much for your work, and for answering my earlier question in the chat. I'm just curious how you decided to concentrate on the part of the pipeline that is like convening people who are already doing work, as opposed to what you mentioned earlier, which is like kind of doing more like thought leadership around like the neighborhood as a meaningful unit of action and the importance of this kind of leadership, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious
Um,
because we're thinking about similar things for my organization. Like, do we work with the people who are kind of already with it, or do we try to get more people into the game?
yeah, and of course, Grace, like both are really important, but
Yeah.
I have been really kind of enlivened in the last couple of years with another friend and colleague who is incredible. Her name is Deborah Freezy. I actually saw her in Boston earlier this week, and Meg Wheatley. And they have talked about this kind of visual. It's almost like a map that is called Two Loops. That is probably worth Googling for many of you, and basically describes any system that both like it's borrowed from nature. So every system like grows and then declines. And oftentimes, and that you could say is like the dominant system or the default system. So you could see that as the economy, you could see it as political system, you could see it as a neighborhood system, you could see it as a congregational system. But it tends to go up and then decline. And the reason that I'm interested in convening, especially, is what they say is that the second more emergent loop, um, typically what happens is there are innovators who, even though they might be within the dominant system, begin to sense that not all is well and we have to change. And they might not necessarily even know what to do. It's more of a sense of like, we can't keep doing the thing that we've done. And in that, in a sense, departure from the dominant narrative, it is inherently destabilizing. You don't necessarily know what you're doing. It's often kind of lonely. At the very beginning, you probably just know what you don't want, not necessarily even what you do want. And so once, and what they would say is like that second loop kind of begins with naming and then goes towards more like connecting and then kind of like cultivating and then amplifying as it grows, if it does. And those are kind of like the conditions that are required to help move things along. Actually, Deborah reminded me this week. I'd never thought about this. This is actually just a way to see kind of, in some ways, movements. Because actually, in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, dominant, bad, emergent, good. And actually, that's probably not a wise way to, like, you could, this is also how, like, for example, gangs could recruit um, greater membership is kids who feel disenfranchised and they name, like, you can have belonging with us. And they, like, grow a sense of like belonging and then they like give them more agency and then they amplify it. So it's not necessarily like good or bad. It's how things tend to grow. But I do see a lot of utility in like how do we get the people who feel like they may be on their own to meet like-minded people with similar longing, similar desire. My hunch, Grace, this is maybe too long of an answer, but like I think that one of the most important raw materials that we have to cultivate change is the desire of other people. Especially if you're going to if you're going to try and work without being just, wielding power, basically. Like I think the healthiest change comes from deep listening, and in the listening, trying to hear the good desire and then matching that good desire with capacity and trying to create more pathway. So I do think like broader campaigns and like that naming is important. But I'd be curious about your thought of that awfully long answer.
Um, I have a bias towards action and outcome sooner. Uh,
Hmm.
so I also am kind of leaning towards what you're saying because I think that for climate, specifically, not that it's the only thing that matters, there are just many things that people can be doing but don't realize they can be doing. And exactly what you're saying, they already have these little seeds of motivation and we just need to help cultivate them. We don't need to like implant seeds where they aren't already. I'm curious if you've something that our team has been really into recently has been motivational interviewing. Does this
Hmm.
ring a bell for you?
No, that's a good phrase. Can you describe it for everybody?
Yeah, for sure. It comes from psychology and like the therapy world, but it is pretty relevant, I think, for our social change movement work. And I'm reading from Google. It's a collaborative, person-centered communication style designed to help people resolve mixed feelings and find their own internal motivation to change. So, like in a clinical setting, it's kind of
Yeah.
like, why do you want to go to the gym? What's
Uh-huh.
stopping you from going to the gym? What
Yeah.
would be really nice about that future? But you can see how it would be really applicable for all the work that we're trying to do because I guess, like, in a sense, we all believe that people are useful and helpful. And the nice thing about it being from psychology is that those stodgy academics have created lots and lots of manuals and training and research on it, which is useful for learning purposes. But thank you for your answer. And yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for the work that you're doing too.
Mhm. Thanks for your
awesome.
question, Grace, and for your work.
So Dave Rice has a question as well. Dave, would you like to say it out loud, or do you need someone else to read it for you?
Right.
Or do you
Yeah, I
feel?
was on mute. Sorry.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Hey Tim. Great. Love the effort. It's awesome. Also, Grace would really be interested in learning more about what you're doing, and just on that line, if a number of us are involved in similar initiatives, somehow it would be cool to just list those somehow or get those, put them into the chat or whatever, because like with everything, it's all about collaboration and creating synergy and taking, a lot of the good ideas and thoughts that I'm sure exist in this group. But I'm working on a very similar thing, Tim. So offline, I'd love to have a discussion with you on it. Have been working on it for a number of years now, 6 years probably, in my role as the president of the United Nations Association of Orange County, California, and an initiative called Sustainable Impact Alliance to do a lot of what you're talking about doing, to have
Love
a
it.
more or a more designed way and a collaborative way to actually help local leaders and engage business, academia, and nonprofits more collaboratively to address our issues. And so my question that I put in the chat is it too early yet to talk about successes, early successes? Or have you been able to see some early successes that you can talk to and that might give hope for, building on?
Oh,
Where are
yeah,
you
yeah,
on
yeah.
that?
Well, that's a kind question, Dave. And yeah, great to meet you and thank you for your work. I mentioned Peter Black. The very first neighbor economics that we did was about 10 years ago in Louisville, Kentucky, that he spoke at. But he said, hey, I really want to do this in Cincinnati next year, but I want us to have a kind of goal to be able to point back a year after the event of things that happened that likely wouldn't have happened had we not convened. So, what had happened after that event in Cincinnati, which has also transpired in, I would say, I guess, all of the events, is that oftentimes, as a rule, the local leaders and innovators find that they're given more, in a sense, like national attention, which often creates more capacity, financial capacity, whether that's in the form of investment or grants or um, attention for sure, in the form of various sectors, whether that be like creative real estate or faith or catalytic capital or entrepreneurship, hospitals as anchors. There's been a growing lens of pure wisdom and collaboration that has created all kinds of various ventures, both between them and on their own. And then at kind of like in some ways, like a higher level, I do feel like neighborhood economics is kind of like trying to embody and wave the flag that repairing local economies not only should happen, but it actually is happening. And in that way, we're trying to be a kind of like, well, the fancy word would be hermeneutic of like, be careful where you pay attention because oftentimes there is way more incredible things that are already happening, and we're just maybe not, we don't have the time or capacity, or we're kind of barraged from the algorithm, which is incentivized for kind of like outrage and
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That maybe there's more happening right now, which is actually more hopeful,
Yeah.
and we're not aware of it for
Yeah.
various reasons. So yeah, I think all of those could be pointed as successes. And at some level, neighbor economics is trying to be in the kind of like movement and even field building space, which I think a lot of us are at various levels. So
Hmm.
um, it might be a drop in the bucket, but it's an important drop.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
So I see people dropping questions in the chat. I want to invite them to come on screen though and ask their questions since the recording will exist for lots of other people. And I hate hearing my own voice on recording, so I could easily read out your questions. But I'm going to call on you and see if you want to come on screen. If not, I'll jump to the next person. If nobody wants to come on screen, I'll read them out. So Roger, do you want to ask one of your questions?
Yeah, actually, this is very interesting. And I am working on an education group right now that's trying to use like the whole approach of getting kids more involved in their communities and so forth. So I was just wondering how much work you've done with that. And a second question I put in the chat, which we can handle separately. Does your work include utilizing participatory budgeting and
Mm.
developing worker cooperatives? These are two areas that I'm very interested in. But the schools, I think, could be a really great way of getting the community involved. You get the kids out there actually talking to their community, finding out more. So it's a kind of happy balance if you can do that.
Yeah, Roger, we haven't, I would say the primary kind of audience that tends to come to neighborhood economics tends to be certainly adults, and many of them are either funders, entrepreneurs, um, various folks in kind of the helping sectors be what we're doing. I think that'd be really, really beautiful. I do think generally one of the things that we're trying to get after is, and there's some questions I think on the here too of like, well, what is can we have some conversations? And I think the younger we talk about this, the better. Like, what is the purpose of money or capital? Um, what is it for? Um, it you can define economies in different way, but if is the purpose of, for example, the economy just more economy, more money? Well, why? What is the kind of bigger story that we're a part of? And involving children in that, I think could be really profound. And then on the more like tactical side, I'm not involved in it, but I've heard of some incredible things where there's just much more, not only project, but like entrepreneurship kind of training very early on. And I think that's just like a great skill set to be including within our education system or beyond in various after school projects. Um, as to co-ops, we have often included a whole bunch of experts in that. I'm thinking of Co-op Cincy in particular. It's kind of become a national leader. Also like ESOPs, I think is the word, like employee
Hmm.
ownership. And there's a whole movement there. There's been a lot of conversations over the years around what's called the silver tsunami. So as boomers are retiring, um, and and many of their businesses, particularly small businesses, are kind of up for grabs. Could those then be turned into employee ownership? That's a big conversation and question. Um, my colleague Kevin Jones knows probably more about this like broader space. But yeah, there are so many ways to begin to try and repair local economies, and all the things that you mentioned, I think, are fantastic tools. And arguably, like there's like, as you know, there's like movements happening within, for example, just co-op. Like there's movements of cooperatives all over the country and the world, of course. But um, yeah, it's one more lens to try and pay attention to.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. I'm gonna ask Alex's question in my own words because I've been wondering something similar. You're really good at framing all the thematic narrative part of it. I'm wondering if there also are very specific neighborhoods that you see doing this, and maybe if you could lift up or one or two that you see as like a great model. It doesn't have to be perfect, of course, but of people engaging in this sort of work on the hyper local level that you're talking about, and as a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, our last event was in Chicago. I mean, and I'm thinking of like, gosh, there's so many. There's not like one that's like absolutely a perfect scenario.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
The it kind of depends on where things are coming from. This is broadest to my broader kind of faith world, but I have long, long, long been really inspired by the neighborhood of North Lawndale and here in Chicago, on Chicago's west side. Um, I've been pretty close to it because the pastor of Lawndale Community Church, he's been there about 3 years. It's a 40-year-old congregation. Um, has been my board chair for Parish Collective for probably 4 or 5 years now. But through honestly, that congregation in part, there's a whole bunch of different things that are happening at every level, but there has been um, like an entire, essentially like almost like neighborhood hospital system that has been built up. There is incredible work that's happening with like agriculture and aquaponics that's grown and is learning, it's like becoming an economy and then is connected. Um, there's all kinds of youth work that's happening. There's all kinds of addiction work that's happening. And that in many ways was a kind of stabilizing force. And now they're asking far more questions about kind of local economic development as it relates to retail, as it relates um, to ownership for sure, as it relates to access to capital, as it relates to housing and affordable housing, and the various ways that you can try and achieve affordable housing. Um, so I think that's a great one. There's yeah, dozens and dozens.
That's great.
Um, it's a good question.
Thank you. Linda, would you like to come ask live your question, or would you like me to read it off?
No, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to ask it live, and I'm excited. I'm a new member of the We All community, and I'm excited to be part of these kinds of
Thanks
conversations.
for being here.
Yeah. A quick background. I am involved in. My son has started a company in Canada that does 3D construction printing, which is a huge opportunity to upend the construction community to build what I prefer to call attainable housing over affordable housing.
Mm,
It's there are lots of people with means that can't afford to buy a house or even find one to buy.
totally.
And part of what you're talking about with geographical communities is the bind that we're in with the existing development of the land. The
Mhm.
resistance for dropping a 6 unit property in a suburban neighborhood where it's a NIMBY situation that people say, like, I don't want an apartment building beside my house and my nice backyard and my garden. So it's I think an interesting component of this, of the realities of transforming these communities. To that end, though, my question is about what about an opportunity to do a sort of almost like a utopic kind of proof of concept by working with the communities that were burned out completely in California, where you're looking at literally rebuilding a neighborhood, a whole community, a whole village, a whole town, to work with local people. There's a fellow who won a Powerball. I think he won a multi-million-dollar Powerball. And he is looking at one of Alameda, I think, is one of the communities, and he's bought, I think, 12 properties or something that he wants to do. But my vision is that you have an opportunity there to go in and say, what if we were to do this, not just thinking about replacing what was there, but building something that is sustainable, that is going to create a community. Also, when you look at that situation, what's happening is the people that live there will not be able to afford to move back there. And there's also the insurance issue. So part of my thinking with the 3D printing is that, and this is kind of relating, but looking at ways that we can quickly build up a community, and 3D printing would be part of that. For example, in a place like Paradise, you could print a once the area was detoxified, you could print a 2-bedroom ADU in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, you could have so our company has done the research. Our building designs are seismic approved. And we're also working on fire resistance. So cement already is fire resistant. So you could look at, a catalog of buildings that people could choose from. You could have insurance companies that back those up. Then you could look at the other infrastructures like building the
Linda, if you
schools, the
don't mind, I'm
fire
going to pause you. Do you have
all
a
that.
question for Tim?
Yeah, so my question
Okay.
is, what do you think about the idea of finding a community where you could start from scratch and work with that community to put these concepts and ideas into motion and prove the validity of the ideas versus trying to squeeze it into communities that are already existing, which is a bit of an uphill battle.
I would say if you can give it a go, give it a go. I mean, it's a great venture. There are trade-offs from starting from scratch, and there are trade-offs when you go the more kind of iterative route as to what's already there. Um, it sounds like in your ventures to try and create this as a company, which sounds fantastic. I'd be curious about like what the reaction is right now. Like, are people excited to move in? I'm sure they're more attainable. I love that phrase of attainable housing. I think that's what we want for everybody. Um, so if you can do it, I think absolutely. If the market is there, like if of course, by all means. Now, part of why I love the idea of like whole neighborhoods and why I like the kind of Jane Jacobs idea also of like you could say kind of like small wins that build over time is that sometimes when you start from the beginning, whether it's a whole new company or in some sense like a development or neighborhood, um, you're going to need obviously more than just residential to create kind of like the holism of life. And so that would be like a broader challenge if you're trying to like cultivate an entire neighborhood as it relates to like schools and hospitals and retail and water systems and power systems and things like that.
I
But
guess that I agree, and that's the challenge that I would face with what you're suggesting about focusing on neighborhoods is that the reality of all of those things and all of those systems and all of those attitudes already being in place, how do you transform to move to the future vision that you have for neighborhoods? And I mean, those things all seem like insurmountable challenges at scale. So
maybe
that's my question. And just so you know, I'm not planning on doing that. I'm just saying that in my imagination, that could be an opportunity to take the ideas that you have and try to work with one of those communities, one of those municipalities, one of those places where they're trying to reestablish a community and bring that philosophy to the reestablishment of that community. Seems
Yeah.
like a terrific opportunity.
I think it sounds like a terrific opportunity too. I think it was the writer David Brooks who said that he defines culture as like the way that you change culture, or the historically it happens, is people, usually small groups of people, and usually on the edge of a given system, find a better way to live, and then others start to copy it.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
so if you can do that with I think absolutely. I think that can also happen in the embeddedness of everyday neighborhoods as well. At the end of the day, I
Mhm.
think what we're looking for is a better, more holistic way to live together,
Mhm.
and then opening the door for others to be able to participate as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Hmm.
Dorothy, would you like to ask a question?
Sure.
Good to see you.
Uh, Good to see you. It's been wonderful listening to you, Tim.
Oh, thank you.
And my question is whether uh, you have in mind a longer term vision of how all the local activity can combine and unite into a big enough united movement to take the power to change the regulations of our global economy so that we change it to the well-being economy instead of the for-profit economy that is perpetuating extreme inequality, exploitation, and destroying the planet. And
Exactly.
are there organizations that are beginning to do that convening? Because to me, I see lots of great local organizations, lots of separate national organizations, and there's about 25 different names for the future economy. I like well-being economy the best. But then this conversation isn't happening enough in the mainstream, even though the 90 million people who didn't vote because they want to see that change, in
Yeah,
my opinion.
I think you're right too. Well, here's what I'm working on right now. Another venture that I am giving time and attention to started from some convenings that has now blossomed into a fantastic Substack I'd recommend called Flourishing Neighborhoods, written by a gentleman named Seth Kaplan, who also wrote a book called Fragile Neighborhoods. And for the last 4 or 5 years, he and I and a handful of other friends have been gathering in December in New York to try and convene the a broad cross-section of organizations that essentially all believe that the neighborhood is the unit of change that we want to center. So it's economic development, civic, education, social, religious. There's a whole host. Um, and I would absolutely commend his work holistically.
Did you
That
say what was
puts
his name? Seth Kaplan?
Seth Kaplan with a K,
Yeah. Mhm.
Kaplan. And yeah, he's got a Substack now. He just launched. That's called Flourishing Neighborhoods. And then he's pretty prolific on LinkedIn, if any of you are on LinkedIn. He's posting usually once a week, really great articles and things like that. Um,
Are you
and
following Policy Link?
a little bit, yeah. I would say um, I think the underneath, Dorothy, what you're getting after is something that I also very much long for, and that is how at a pretty high level, how do we create the environments and the relationships to like continue again in that kind of like second loop to grow in growing trust and capacity and power in order to begin seeing as like an alternative story to the dominant system that's now in decline and increasingly harmful. Uh, that is of great interest. And again, that thing brings me back to the role of convening. Like, um, that might begin with awareness of new ideas and needs to go into kind of relationships and then new projects and collaboration and ventures. And where I think my personal hunch is, and I don't know that I'd hold super hard to this, but I generally feel like or believe that so much attention is given to politics and policy for obvious reasons. But typically, slightly upstream of politics is economics. And upstream of economics is, you could say, culture. And I would argue actually that upstream of culture is a sense of like meaning making, religion, broader stories that give our lives coherence. And so I think that our attention has been in many ways hijacked to thinking that policy and politics can kind of like do the whole job. I do think, of course, it's really important, and there's good policy and bad policy, etc. But I think generally we've made politics a kind of religion that it's not equipped to be. And I think it's almost like we've made, politics can hold 10 gallons, but we keep pouring all of our water into it. And I think that's unwise. I think it's unwise to ignore it as well. But that's just personal. That's just me thinking out loud. That's not the perspective of Neighbor Economics as an organization. Um, but I do think I wish we could have more conversations, like honest conversations about going as far upstream, personally, communally, structurally as possible. And I just feel like we rarely get there. Part of why is because are in an attention economy, even this kind of conversation, which is in 48 minutes, is pretty rare. Um, like scrolling through memes, screaming for attention is arguably the dominant, at least media environment that we're in right now.
Yeah.
I think the world is yearning for that upstream all the way to the values and the faith-based and the unity and the collective benefit. And somehow we have to get that into the power structure.
I think you're entirely right. And I actually wish that there was a way that we could decouple, at least just for a conversation, um, faith and meaning making, spirituality from those other systems, because typically, I'll say in the world of politics, um, they try and use those things in order to gain attention or votes, whatever. And I would say that's true across the board, oftentimes. So yeah, I think we need much more conversations like that. And I don't know, who's the uh, forget who said this, that like basically to be human is to need hope and to need meaning. It's like a human need. And so there's big stories that can answer that, but they're all, to me, it's actually, at the end of the day, we all have faith in something. It might be religious faith, it might not be religious faith. Um, but the more that we could be honest about those conversations, like, here's what I'm betting on, I literally don't know if it's true. Like, there's no way to prove it. I think those are better conversations than like wielding faith or belief as a kind of barometer for who's in, who's out, and or even who's right and who's wrong. We're all making bets.
I'm gonna add a little plug for our organization and so what we're doing. I put in the chat that Peter Block's book, The Art of Community, had a major influence on me, and
Yeah.
I've studied a little bit the ABCD model that he perpetuated, but never had the chance to actually put it into action. But I think that's, some of the things that just came up through this last round are things we're trying to do, trying to convene both people at the very micro level for conversations in that style at this level, but also very much interested in bringing together and aligning people across different movements without saying, it can't be this or it can't be that. But, as Dorothy said, how do we build enough power to at least get a lot closer to where we'd like to be than where we are now? So hopefully those who are new will come back and join us for future ones. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Then Jesse and I are going to promote some upcoming events for 90 seconds. So there's a really engaged chat, which is awesome, but I've sort of lost track of who's got questions and who doesn't. And so it'd be great if there's someone who hasn't gone before with a question, if you could come on camera or raise your physical hand or your virtual hand, because it'll be a little much for me to scroll through the chat. And if nobody's got questions, I'm just going to keep talking in a very monotone voice for the next hour. Okay. Hotlam, I forget your real name, but I'm calling you Hotlam. So,
That's good enough. I'm overly identified with that place. Hotlam is a Shasta word that means steep. So I'm really, really inspired by John Fullerton's work and Kate Raworth's work.
Hmm.
And I'm in the process of working with the California Donut Economics Coalition
Awesome.
to try to reframe the measures of abundance for our little city here, little township, Weed, California, which has burned multiple times. And the mill that founded the town is up for auction on August 5th and is being promoted as a location for a data center. The town
Mm.
is in absolute bankruptcy, infrastructure is failing. And I think that the politicians need new talking points to enable them to inspire their constituency to contribute to abundance in ways that are different than following kind of the capitalistic model that we're all trailing behind. And so I'm just curious if you have any examples of how communities have redefined value, redefined. You spoke kind of in a different way about inspiration as a form of exchange. And I think that's what you're doing here. Thank you. And I'm just wondering if you have other models of showing that we are flourishing as a community, even if we don't have the kind of fiat currency that might be the normal way of measuring success.
Yeah, that's awfully kind. And for those of you who haven't read Donut Economics by Kate Rayworth, a fantastic book and an entire like movement that's growing all over the world. I believe she's from the UK. Um, well, I have been you won't be surprised that I've been deeply formed by the asset-based community development kind of imagination, which some folks want to kind of put an E on that. I'd probably be on that camp of like ABC, asset-based community development, quote, and economies. Um, and the big contrast there is rather than looking at our neighborhoods as deficient and problematic and in need, to begin by naming what's strong about them and what's beautiful and what the trajectory of those I think are important and can create alternatives to potentially fiat currencies. But for example, when you look at a neighborhood or a city through more of an abundant lens, and where, everyone has gifts to contribute, then things like time banking become more plausible and possible. Local currencies can take on more import. Um, there is usually more like opportunities for, for lack of a better word, gifts that are increasingly outside of the normal kind of like exchange of currency, but are really valuable, that our culture increasingly is kind of losing through the professionalization of so much care. Um, the writer Ivan Illich, who is a mentor to John McKnight, who was one of the main kind of figures around asset-based community development, wrote pretty extensively around this idea. Um, that there's so much, like I've got three youngish kids, and it is so much better to like have neighbors who can watch them sometimes than as an example, which I know exactly how much that costs. If I just paid a babysitter $25 an hour, $50 an hour, more than that, anytime that I needed to go run an errand for an hour or something, that has an actual real currency cost that often, frankly, is really expensive. But if I can text or go over to my neighbor who also has young kids and say, hey, can you watch the kids for an hour? I know because I'm a normal adult that I'm in doing that. You don't even have to say, I will totally watch your kids next time. Like that kind of, you could call that gift economy of sorts, but it's not exactly gift. It's more like exchange. And you could show a currency to it. It'd be weird if like he gave me a bill in some ways, you know? After that, like popping by to like letting my kid like play with his kids' toys for an hour. But like that, I feel less urgency of like naming the economic utility of it, though that's probably important, and more of like I want to live in a world where we can be um yeah, the Surface book is fantastic as well. Like we can be leaning on on each other for our gifts and skills that we already have. I'm not uh I write and things like that. I use words a lot for my work. Um I can barely open a bag of potato chips. I can't build anything. Like I need like we all have gifts, we all have deficiencies, and the more that we can lean on each other for those things, again, more locally, the better. Um so I would love to see that grow. I don't know if exactly how much that answers the question or maybe just opens up more. But again,
It's
that's the
great.
kind of world that I want to live in.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. Tim, thank you so much for coming today and your regular ongoing work. I hope you'll come back at some point, either as a guest or to give us an update. I would love to come to one of those conferences if you're going to do one in California. I'm currently choosing not to fly at the moment, so
Totally.
won't be coming to Galveston. And before everybody hops off, just Jesse and I just want to promote 3 or 4 other upcoming events, and then we'll give Tim a proper round of applause. So, Jesse, would you like to go first?
Yes, sure. Sorry, chatting away in the chat. Um, Thanks everyone so much for the lovely discussion today. I want to highlight that next week, it'll be Thursday at 4 p.m. We are doing a discussion specifically centered around strategizing for elections in California. This group has been so wonderfully engaged today, and I would really love for some of you to participate in that conversation as well. It's going to be hosted by me and also Stacy, who's here in on the call today. She has put a lot of thought into what specifically we can ask from our elected officials. There's some information on our website and on our Instagram now also about kind of the specific strategies that she's thinking about, but we would really love for people to come and kind of tell us what's missing from the list, what maybe you'd push back on, what needs adjustment, and just kind of help us work towards a strategy for the elections coming up in the fall. Hopefully, this will kind of be like the first of a series of discussions on that general theme. Again, like California focused, but everybody's welcome. We really appreciate your thoughts.
What
Awesome.
time is that again?
It'll be next Thursday at 4 p.m.
4
Pacific.
p.m. Pacific time?
Pacific.
Pacific time.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's
Thank
an email that's gone out. I'm going to keep mine super short so we can end on time and just say that there's 4 or 5 events coming up that I'm excited about. On August 4th, we just released our California State Policy Guide, trying to move forward what would well-being economy legislation look like at the state level and how to advance that collectively. So you could download that guide now, come talk about it on the 4th. And all the other events, of course, will be emails or on our website. So I more want to focus on Tim and just thank him for all his thought leadership on this and convening people and bringing people together. Because as Tim said, and a couple other people on the chat and verbally said, it's us coming together to try and change how people think about it, expand the narrative, and also to have enough power to make the change. So, Tim, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks you all. Really appreciate it. It's such an honor. Appreciate you all.
you. Thank you.